I stood frozen at the edge of my brother Tyler's wedding reception, a champagne flute clutched in my trembling hand. The crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead in the luxury venue my parents had insisted on booking. Music and laughter filled the air, but I couldn't move. I just overheard my parents talking to my aunt in a quiet corner. "We put Grace's college fund to better use," my father said with a chuckle. $51,000 makes for quite a wedding. $51,000. The exact amount my grandparents had set up for my education before they died. The fund my parents had always told me was barely enough for a semester. A memory flashed through my mind, my mother's voice cold and dismissive. "College is a waste for women anyway, Grace." But I kept my face carefully composed as I walked away, my heart shattering with every step. My grandparents were simple, hard-working people who valued education above all else. Neither of them had the opportunity to attend college, but they were determined that I would. "You'll be the first in our family to get a degree, Grace," my grandfather would tell me, his eyes crinkling with pride. "We're making sure of that." When I was 7, they started a college fund for me. Every birthday and Christmas, they would show me the statement. "Look how it's growing," my grandmother would say. "By the time you're ready, you'll have enough for a good school." I remembered my parents seeming supportive, then nodding along as my grandparents talked about my bright future. But looking back, I should have noticed the tight smiles, the way their eyes never quite reflected the enthusiasm in their voices. Everything changed when I was 12. My grandparents were driving home from visiting us on a rainy night when a truck driver fell asleep at the wheel. They died instantly. I was devastated, but even through my grief, I remembered my grandfather's last words to me. "Keep those grades up, Gracie. Your future's waiting." After the funeral, something shifted in my parents' attitude toward me. It was subtle at first. Less interest in my schoolwork, fewer questions about my goals. Meanwhile, they poured attention and resources into my brother Tyler, who was 3 years older. They never missed his football games, funded his expensive sports equipment, and bragged about him to everyone. "Tyler's a natural athlete," my mother would say. "He'll go far with his talents." I threw myself into my studies, working part-time at the local diner on weekends to save whatever I could. By senior year of high school, I'd maintained a perfect GPA while working 20 hours weekly. When my acceptance letter from Westridge University arrived with a partial scholarship, I was ecstatic. It wasn't a full ride, but it would cover about 30% of the costs. Surely my college fund would handle the rest. That night, I approached my parents at dinner. "I got into Westridge," I said, unable to keep the excitement from my voice. "And they're offering a scholarship." My father glanced up from his plate. "That's nice, but you know we can't afford to send you there even with a scholarship." My mother nodded. "That fund your grandparents set up. It's barely enough for a semester these days. College costs have skyrocketed." "But what about all these years of saving?" I asked, confusion washing over me. "Grandpa always said there would be enough." "Your grandparents were optimistic but unrealistic," my father said firmly. "There's maybe a few thousand in there. Nothing that would make a dent at a private university." My dreams of Westridge crumbled before my eyes. That night I cried silently into my pillow, feeling the absence of my grandparents more acutely than ever. They would have fought for me. They would have found a way. The next morning I called Westridge to decline their offer. The admissions counselor sounded genuinely disappointed. "Your academic record is outstanding, Grace. Are you sure there's nothing we can do? We have some additional scholarship opportunities." "I've made my decision," I said, my voice flat. "Thank you for the opportunity." Instead, I enrolled in community college, the only option I could afford on my own. I picked up more hours at the diner and added a second job at a gas station to cover tuition and books. My parents seemed satisfied with this arrangement, barely acknowledging my exhaustion as I juggled work and studies. "Community college is more practical anyway," my mother commented when I received my schedule. "You can always transfer later if you really want to." 6 months into my first year, my father asked me to help organize some tax documents. As I sorted through the papers on his desk, a bank statement caught my eye. It was an account with my name on it listing a balance of $51,000. The account title read Grace's Education Fund. I stared at the number, unable to process what I was seeing. $51,000. Not a few thousand. Not barely enough for a semester. A full $51,000 that could have covered most of my undergraduate education at Westridge. My hands shook as I held the statement, my mind racing with questions. Had they lied to me? All this time was the money actually there? I slipped the statement under some other papers, determined to confront them later when I had composed myself. That evening, I couldn't focus on my assignments. The betrayal felt like a physical weight on my chest. I kept thinking about the Westridge acceptance letter I'd folded and stored in my desk drawer, a reminder of what could have been. The next morning, I found my father in his home office. I placed the bank statement in front of him. "What is this?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This account has my name on it." He snatched the paper from my hands. "That's our family emergency fund. Your name is on it for legal reasons, but that money isn't for spending." "But it says Grace's education in the account title," I pointed out. "Don't be difficult, Grace," my mother snapped, entering the room. "That money is for serious family needs only." "My education isn't a serious need," I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Your community college is affordable," my father said dismissively. "This money is for real emergencies." I wanted to argue further, but the look on my mother's face stopped me. I'd seen that expression before, the one that said the discussion was over. I retreated to my room, seething with anger and confusion. Why would they put my name on the account and label it for education if they never intended to use it for that purpose? For the next 2 weeks, I observed my parents carefully. They never mentioned the account again, and I didn't bring it up either. I was planning my next move, considering my options. Maybe I could still transfer to Westridge for the fall semester if I could somehow access the fund. Then at Sunday dinner, Tyler announced his engagement to his girlfriend Megan at Sunday dinner. She was from a wealthy family in our town, and I could tell my parents were thrilled about the connection. "We've been thinking," my father said after congratulating them. "We want to give you two the wedding of your dreams." My mother beamed. "We've been saving for something special, and what could be more special than this?" Tyler and Megan were overjoyed immediately, talking about venues and guest lists. I sat silently, the pasta in my mouth, turning to ash. I knew exactly where that money would come from, my education fund. The fund that was supposedly for serious family needs only. The next few months were a whirlwind of wedding planning. I continued taking classes and working multiple jobs, waitressing in the mornings, tutoring in the afternoons, and doing data entry remotely at night. Meanwhile, my parents complained about money in my presence, while secretly planning an increasingly extravagant wedding for Tyler. They booked the Grand Plaza Hotel, the most expensive venue in our city. They hired a renowned chef for the catering, ordered custom monogrammed everything, and flew in a photographer from New York. Every time I heard about another extravagance, I thought about my education fund and felt physically ill. One evening in April, I arrived home early from my tutoring job and overheard my mother on the phone with the wedding planner. "Yes, we have exactly $51,000 set aside for everything," she said. "We want this to be perfect." $51,000. Not 50,000. Not about 50. Exactly 51,000. The precise amount in my education fund. My blood ran cold. After she hung up, I waited until everyone was asleep, then checked my father's office. I found the most recent bank statement for the account, with my name on it. They had emptied it completely. I sat on the floor of the dark office, clutching the statement, tears streaming down my face. This was more than a broken promise or a misunderstanding. This was a deliberate betrayal. They had taken money specifically designated for my future and spent it on a one-day celebration for my brother. I confronted them the next morning at breakfast. "I know you emptied my college fund for Tyler's wedding," I said, placing the statements side by side on the table. My father's expression hardened. "That money was never exclusively for your education," he insisted. "It was always meant for family priorities." "And your brother's wedding is a priority," my mother added. "He's establishing himself in life. A proper wedding is important for his future connections." "What about my future?" I asked. "What about the plans Grandma and Grandpa made for me?" My mother's smile was cold. "Your grandparents had unrealistic expectations. Not everyone is meant for higher education, Grace." I left for my morning shift at the diner with their words echoing in my head. Not everyone is meant for higher education. The implication was clear. They didn't believe in me the way my grandparents had. At dinner the following Sunday, Tyler raised a toast. "I want to thank Mom and Dad for their incredible generosity," he set his arm around Megan. "Not just for the amazing wedding, but for the $20,000 down payment on our new house. We couldn't have done it without you." $20,000. Part of my $51,000. Gone to buy my brother a house while I worked 3 jobs to pay for community college. I looked across the table at my parents' proud faces and felt something inside me crack beyond repair. That night I lay awake thinking about my grandparents. Had they known my parents would do this? Had they put any legal protections on the money they'd saved for me? I doubted it. They had trusted their own daughter to honor their wishes, never imagining she would betray not only me but them as well. I thought about confronting Tyler, telling him where that generous gift had really come from, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. The money was gone. My chances of transferring to a better school seemed to vanish with it. And worst of all, I now understood exactly where I stood in my family. Firmly in second place. The wedding preparations intensified over the next few months. Whenever I wasn't working or studying, my mother expected me to help with endless tasks, addressing invitations, meeting with vendors, assembling gift bags. I was never paid or thanked for my time. "You're the maid of honor," my mother would remind me when I complained about the workload. This is what sisters do. What made it worse was watching the budget balloon with each passing week. The flowers alone cost $5,000. The cake was $2,000. Megan's dress was imported from Paris. Meanwhile, I was counting pennies to afford my textbooks for the next semester. After watching me stuff 200 favor boxes one Sunday afternoon, Tyler finally noticed my exhaustion. "You look beat, sis. I really appreciate all your help with this wedding stuff." I decided to be honest with him. "Tyler, did you know that the money Mom and Dad are using for your wedding was originally my college fund? The one Grandma and Grandpa set up for me?" He frowned, setting down his beer. "What are you talking about? They said they'd been saving for years for my future." They had been saving for my education. There was $51,000 in an account with my name on it. Now it's empty, and suddenly they have exactly that amount for your wedding and house down payment. Tyler's expression hardened. "Look, even if that's true, Mom and Dad can spend their money however they want. I didn't ask them where it came from." "It wasn't their money," I said quietly. "It was meant for my education. Grandma and Grandpa set it up specifically for that." "Well, they're not here anymore, are they?" Tyler snapped. "Mom and Dad are in charge now, and they decided I needed it more. Maybe you should try being less selfish." I stared at my brother, this person I'd grown up with, who now seemed like a complete stranger. He knew what was happening and didn't care. In fact, he seemed to agree with my parents that he was more deserving. "Selfish," I repeated. "I'm working 3 jobs to put myself through community college, while you're getting a $50,000 wedding and a house. And I'm selfish." "It's not my fault they believe in me more," he said with a shrug. "Maybe if you'd applied yourself differently, things would be different." I walked away before I said something unforgivable. Tyler's words had confirmed my worst fear. My family had made a conscious decision to invest in him instead of me. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a temporary financial constraint. It was a deliberate choice. That same week, my academic advisor at the community college called me into her office. "Grace, your work here has been exceptional," Dr. Winters said. "Have you considered transferring to a 4-year university? With your grades, you could qualify for additional scholarships." Hope flickered inside me. "Do you really think so?" She nodded, pulling out some brochures. "The state university has an excellent business program, and they reserve scholarships for outstanding transfer students. The deadline is next month. I'd be happy to write you a recommendation." I spent the next week preparing my application, staying up late after work to perfect my essays. When the acceptance letter arrived along with an offer for a partial scholarship, I felt a surge of determination. This could be my chance to salvage something from the wreckage of my grandparents' plans. But there was still one obstacle: I would need a co-signer for the student loans to cover the remaining costs. With my limited credit history and part-time income, I couldn't qualify on my own. That evening, I approached my parents in the living room with my acceptance letter and loan application. "I need a co-signer," I explained. "My credit history isn't long enough to qualify on my own." My mother didn't even look up from her wedding planner. "It's time you accept that college isn't for you, Grace. You're doing fine at the community college while working. That's a perfectly respectable path. But this is an opportunity for me to—" "Your brother is establishing a family," my father interrupted. "That's a real accomplishment. We invested in the child with real potential." His words hit me like a physical blow. I looked at them, really looked at them, and suddenly understood they had never believed in me, not the way my grandparents had. "So that's it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. You took my college fund for Tyler's wedding, and now you won't even sign a loan application to help me continue my education. You're being dramatic, my mother said dismissively. Besides, we don't have the financial capacity to take on that kind of responsibility right now. The wedding has strained our resources. The wedding. The wedding that was costing the exact amount that should have funded my education. I left the room without another word, the rejection burning in my chest. 2 days later, I discovered from Tyler's fiancé that the wedding budget had ballooned to over $75,000. They had spent my entire fund plus more while I couldn't even get a signature on a loan application. The flowers are being flown in from Holland. Megan gushed, showing me photos on her phone. And wait until you see the custom ice sculpture. It's going to be magical. I nodded mechanically, calculating in my head $75,000 could have paid for my entire undergraduate education at a good university with money left over for grad school. But instead, it was buying orchids from Holland and an ice sculpture that would melt before the reception ended. At the wedding rehearsal dinner, my mother stood to make a toast. She looked elegant in her new designer dress glass raised high. Tyler has always known how to make us proud, she said, smiling at my brother. Unlike some who waste time with foolish dreams, he understands what really matters in life, family and commitment. Her eyes drifted to me as she emphasized foolish dreams, and in that moment I knew. This wasn't just about the money. This wasn't just about Tyler's wedding. This was about ensuring I stayed exactly where they thought I belonged in a small life, with small dreams that wouldn't inconvenience them or challenge their view of me. I excused myself early from the rehearsal dinner, claiming a headache. Back in my room, I sat at my desk and looked at the State University acceptance letter. Without a co-signer for the loans, it seemed like another dead end. But as I stared at it, something hardened inside me, a determination I hadn't felt before. My parents had stolen my college fund. They had mocked my dreams and called them foolish. They had made it clear they didn't believe in me. But they had overlooked something crucial: I still believed in myself. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. On Tyler's wedding day, I performed my maid of honor duties flawlessly. I helped Megan with her dress, arranged her train for photographs, and gave a heartfelt toast that everyone applauded. No one would have guessed the pain behind my smile. The venue was even more extravagant than I'd imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Thousands of orchids adorned every surface. A string quartet played during the ceremony, and a 10-piece band performed at the reception. The meal was 7 courses, each paired with a different wine. The cake stood 6 tiers high, with hand-painted sugar flowers. $51,000 of my future transformed into one day of celebration. During the reception, I stepped outside for air and overheard my parents talking with my uncle by the terrace doors. The venue alone cost $30,000, my father was saying proudly. But it was worth every penny. That's a lot to spend in this economy, my uncle remarked. Wasn't some of that money originally set aside for Grace's education? My mother laughed lightly. We repurposed it for something more meaningful. College would have been wasted on Grace anyway. It's for the child who matters, she added, sipping her champagne. I pressed myself against the wall, my chest tight. It wasn't just that they had taken my money, they had done it deliberately, believing I didn't deserve an education. The realization solidified something in me. Fighting them openly had never worked. It was time for a different approach. The following Monday, I met with Professor Jenkins, my favorite instructor at the community college. I need to find a way to continue my education without family support, I told her. Are there resources I might not know about? She looked at me thoughtfully. There are always options for determined students, Grace. Let me make some calls. Within a week, she had connected me with 3 different scholarship opportunities, specifically for students in my situation. I applied to all of them, spending nights crafting perfect essays while maintaining my 3 jobs. I also registered for additional classes, pushing myself to complete my associate's degree faster. If I was going to transfer to a 4-year program, I needed to maximize every opportunity. In one of my business classes, I met Sandra Fleming, whose father owned a large accounting firm in the city. We were paired for a project, and she was impressed by my work ethic and attention to detail. My dad's always looking for people like you, she mentioned after we received an A+ on our presentation. Would you be interested in an internship? It pays well and they're flexible with student schedules. The internship at Fleming Accounting paid nearly twice what I was making at the diner. I immediately gave notice at 2 of my jobs and focused on school and my new position. Mister, Fleming took an interest in my situation and began mentoring me personally. "You have a natural aptitude for finance," he told me after I completed my first month. "Have you considered specializing in this field?" I hadn't, but the idea appealed to me. I began taking additional finance courses and discovered I had a talent for it. Numbers made sense to me in a way people often didn't. There were rules, patterns, and consequences that followed logical principles. Mr. Fleming noticed my growing interest. "The business world needs more women in finance," he said, "especially ones who understand both the technical aspects and the human implications." He began giving me more responsibility at the firm, exposing me to different aspects of financial planning and management. I soaked up the knowledge, eagerly recognizing that this was the kind of education my grandparents had wanted for me, not just classroom learning, but practical experience that would shape my future. 3 months of 60-hour weeks later, I received news that changed everything. I'd been awarded a full scholarship to complete my bachelor's degree at Harrington University's prestigious business program. It included a stipend for living expenses. I sat alone in my tiny apartment, staring at the acceptance letter, tears streaming down my face. This was it, my chance to finally get the education my grandparents had wanted for me, and I had done it entirely on my own. "You've earned this," Professor Jenkins said when I showed her the letter. "Harrington doesn't award these scholarships lightly. They see in you what I've seen all along: exceptional potential." I told no one in my family. Not a word about the scholarship, the transfer, or my plans to move. They had shown me exactly where I stood with them, and now I would show them what I could do without them. The scholarship didn't start until the fall semester, which gave me 4 months to prepare. I continued working at Fleming Accounting, saving every penny I could. Mr. Fleming increased my hours during the summer and gave me a small raise. "Consider it an investment in your future," he said. "I expect great things from you, Grace." His confidence in me was a balm for the wounds my family had inflicted. Here was someone who saw my potential and wanted to nurture it, not squash it beneath comparisons to my brother. As the summer progressed, I focused on 3 things: working, studying independently to prepare for Harrington's rigorous program, and finding affordable housing near campus. The stipend would help, but I knew I'd need to continue working part-time to cover all my expenses. Sandra, who had become a close friend, offered a solution. "My cousin has a garden apartment she's looking to rent near Harrington. It's small, but the price is reasonable, and she's a good landlord." The apartment was perfect. A tiny studio with just enough space for a bed, desk, and kitchenette. The rent was within my budget, especially if I continued working part-time at a branch of Fleming Accounting near campus. By August, everything was in place. I had my scholarship, housing, and a transfer of my internship arranged. I was ready to begin the next chapter of my life, one my parents knew nothing about. On a Tuesday morning in August, while my parents were at work, I packed everything I owned into my 12-year-old Honda and left their house. I'd found a tiny studio apartment near campus, barely 500 square feet, but it was mine. I left a brief note on the kitchen counter. "Moving out to be closer to work. We'll be in touch." I didn't specify where I was going or what my plans were. Let them wonder for once. Let them experience even a fraction of the uncertainty they'd imposed on me. My mother called that evening, sounding more annoyed than concerned. "You could have given us proper notice, Grace. Now who's going to help with dinner when I work late?" No questions about where I was living. No offers to help. Just irritation at the inconvenience my absence would cause. "I'm sure you'll figure it out, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "Tyler and Megan only live 20 minutes away now, thanks to their new house." She didn't catch the edge in my voice. "Well, make sure you come for Sunday dinner," she said before hanging up. "Your father and I still expect to see you regularly." I didn't go to Sunday dinner. I sent a text claiming I had to work, which wasn't entirely untrue. I had picked up a weekend shift at a local bookstore to supplement my income. When they called the following week, I repeated the excuse. Eventually, the invitations became less frequent, then stopped altogether. Tyler texted occasionally, usually to complain about his new marriage or to ask for advice about dealing with Megan's family. I responded politely but briefly, never sharing details about my own life. My new life at Harrington University was transformative. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who valued education and hard work. My professors challenged me intellectually, and my classmates respected my contributions. I formed genuine friendships with people who supported my goals rather than dismissing them. Sandra's father offered me a position in his firm's trust and estate planning department, where I worked 20 hours weekly while maintaining a full course load. The work fascinated me, particularly the legal structures protecting assets designated for specific purposes like education. Family financial planning is all about protection, Mr. Fleming explained during one of our mentoring sessions, making sure assets reach their intended beneficiaries and are used for their intended purposes. What happens when they're not, I asked, thinking of my own situation. If funds are misappropriated from legally designated trusts, that's actually fraud, he said, especially when the intent of the original grantor is clearly documented. This information sparked something in me. I began researching trust law in my spare time, piecing together what had happened with my grandparents' fund. I requested copies of their will and the trust documentation from the county records office. What I found confirmed my suspicions. The education trust my grandparents had established was explicitly designated for my post-secondary education. There were no provisions allowing the funds to be used for any other purpose. My parents, as trustees after my grandparents' deaths, had violated the terms of the trust when they emptied it for Tyler's wedding and house. In my third semester at Harrington, I arranged a meeting with Professor Harmon, who taught estate law. I'm curious about educational trusts, I explained, presenting my situation as a hypothetical case. If grandparents establish a fund specifically for their grandchild's education, but after their death the parents use that money for something else entirely, is that legal? Professor Harmon's expression turned serious. Without seeing the specific documentation, I can't give definitive advice. But generally speaking, if there was clear intent, especially if documented in the trust establishment, then no, that would likely constitute misappropriation of funds, potentially actionable in civil court at minimum. I thanked him, and left not yet sure what I would do with this information, but feeling strangely vindicated. My parents hadn't just been cruel, they had likely broken the law. Meanwhile, my academic performance had caught the attention of the university administration. I was invited to join the honors program and selected for a competitive research assistantship. By the beginning of my final year, I had the highest GPA in the business school. The dean called me into her office one afternoon. "Grace, I wanted to personally tell you that you've been selected as this year's valedictorian. Your performance has been remarkable." I sat stunned as she continued. "The ceremony is quite significant. The governor usually attends along with various business leaders. You'll give an address, of course. Will your family be there to celebrate with you?" My family, who had stolen my chance at education and told me I wasn't worth investing in, who had no idea I was even attending this university. "Yes," I heard myself say. "They'll be there." That evening I drafted a careful invitation to my parents. I described it as a small completion ceremony at what they would assume was my community college. I made it sound routine, unimportant, something they could attend without much effort or inconvenience. I deliberately left out any mention of Harrington University valedictorian status or honors. The response came from my mother via text. "We'll try to make it. Might be late, your father has a golf game that morning." I smiled to myself. They had no idea what was coming. The next day I received an email that nearly made me drop my phone. Blackwell Financial, one of the most prestigious firms in the country, was offering me a position upon graduation with a starting salary of $150,000, more than triple what my father made after 30 years at his company. I accepted immediately. As the semester progressed, I threw myself into my classes, an internship with renewed energy. Every achievement felt like another step away from the limitations my parents had tried to impose on me. Every A on an exam, every commendation from a professor, every recognition from the university was a quiet refutation of their belief that I wasn't worth investing in. I rarely thought about Tyler's wedding anymore, or the house my parents had helped him buy. Those things seemed increasingly insignificant compared to what I was building for myself. The anger that had once consumed me had transformed into something more productive determination. When Sandra asked if I was nervous about revealing my success to my family, I surprised myself with my answer. "No," I said thoughtfully. "I'm not doing this for revenge or to prove them wrong. I'm doing it because this is the path my grandparents believed I should take, the path I've always wanted for myself." But as graduation approached, I couldn't deny the satisfaction I felt imagining their faces when they realized what I'd accomplished without them. After all the dismissals, the redirected funds, the lack of support, I had succeeded anyway, and soon they would know it. As graduation approached, I focused on 3 things: finalizing my valedictorian speech, preparing evidence of my parents' misappropriation of my trust fund, and emotionally steeling myself for the confrontation to come. With Sandra's help, I had tracked down the original trust documentation my grandparents had established. Their instructions were explicit. This fund is established exclusively for the post-secondary education of our granddaughter, Grace Elizabeth Harrison. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. I also obtained bank records showing the transfer of the entire $51,000 to my parents' personal account 2 weeks before Tyler's wedding venue was booked. The paper trail was clear and damning. Professor Harmon reviewed everything and confirmed what I suspected. "This is textbook misappropriation of designated funds," he said. "You have a strong case should you choose to pursue it." But did I want to pursue it? That was the question I wrestled with as graduation approached. Legal action would be messy, public, and potentially devastating to my family. While part of me wanted justice, another part recognized that a lawsuit wouldn't undo the past. It wouldn't give me back the years of struggling through community college while working multiple jobs. It wouldn't erase the hurt of hearing my mother say I wasn't worth investing in. What I wanted, I realized, wasn't money or legal vindication. It was acknowledgement. I wanted my parents to see what they had done and understand the consequences of their actions. I wanted them to recognize that despite their lack of faith in me, I had succeeded. My valedictorian speech went through 12 drafts. I wanted it to be perfect, not just as an academic achievement, but as the moment when I would reclaim my narrative. I practiced in front of Sandra for hours, refining every word. "You need to be prepared for their reaction," Sandra warned me after a rehearsal. "They might get angry, defensive, or even try to take credit for your success." "I know," I replied, "but I've spent years being silent. This time they're going to hear me." Meanwhile, my life continued to evolve in ways my parents knew nothing about. I had secured an apartment in the city near my new job at Blackwell Financial. I'd been invited to join several professional organizations for women in finance. I'd even started dating James, a law student I'd met through a study group. 1 week before graduation, Tyler called. It was the first time we'd spoken in months. "Hey sis, just checking in. Haven't heard much from you lately." "I've been busy," I said, keeping my tone light. "How are things with you and Megan?" He sighed heavily. "Honestly, not great financially. The house needs a new roof and Megan's pregnant. Mom and Dad already told us they can't help anymore, said they're tapped out after the wedding." "Congratulations on the baby," I said sincerely. "That's wonderful news." "Yeah, well, wonderful and expensive. I don't know how we're going to afford everything. I might have to take a second job." I thought of the $20,000 of my money that had gone toward their house down payment. "Sometimes we have to work for what we need, Tyler. I've been doing it for years." There was a pause. "Yeah, I guess you have. Listen, are you really still at community college? Mom mentioned some ceremony coming up." "I'm finishing my program," I said carefully. "It would mean a lot if you all could be there." "We'll try," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. After hanging up, I felt a twinge of sympathy for my brother. He hadn't created the dynamic in our family. He had simply benefited from it. And now, with a baby on the way, he was facing financial struggles despite the advantages our parents had given him. Perhaps there was a way to address the injustice without punishing my future niece or nephew. That thought shaped my final decision about how to handle the confrontation with my parents. The night before graduation, I could barely sleep. Everything I had worked for, all the double shifts, all-nighters, and sacrifices, had led to this moment. My grandparents would have been so proud. The thought brought tears to my eyes. My phone buzzed with an email notification. It was the final offer letter from Blackwell Financial confirming my start date and salary package. The total compensation, including signing bonus and benefits, exceeded $170,000 annually. I thought about how my parents had believed $51,000 was better invested in a one-day wedding than in my entire future. How wrong they had been. Morning arrived with perfect spring weather. As I dressed in my honors regalia, the gold stole and cords signifying highest academic achievement, I felt calm. Today, justice would finally be served not through vengeance, but through truth. Sandra arrived to help me prepare, bringing coffee and bagels. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I nodded, adjusting my cap in the mirror. I've been ready for years. Graduation day dawned bright and clear. I arrived early at the university's grand amphitheater, where workers were arranging thousands of chairs facing the imposing stage. As valedictorian, I would sit front and center on that platform next to the university president and distinguished guests. I had arranged for Sandra to meet my family in the parking lot and escort them to their reserved seats, front row positions, that would ensure they wouldn't miss a moment of what was to come. At 11:30, Sandra texted me, "They're here. Your mother is complaining about the unexpected formality of the community college ceremony. Your father looks annoyed about missing golf." I smiled to myself, adjusting my cap in the mirror of the preparation room. The gold honors cords gleamed against my gown. The ceremony began precisely at noon. The procession of faculty in their colorful academic regalia entered first, followed by university officials and honored guests. Then came the students, nearly 800 graduates in their black gowns. I entered last, taking my seat on the stage beside the university president. From my elevated position, I could see my parents and Tyler clearly in the front row. My mother was frowning, taking in the elaborate setting with confusion. My father was checking his watch. Tyler looked bored. None of them had opened their programs yet, which would have revealed exactly where they were and who I had become. The university president stepped to the podium. "Welcome to the 125th commencement ceremony of Harrington University, one of our nation's most distinguished institutions of higher learning." I watched as my mother's head snapped up. She grabbed the program and opened it, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. She elbowed my father, pointing frantically at the page. Tyler leaned over to look. Their faces registered shock, then disbelief. The ceremony progressed through the official welcome and a brief address from the governor. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. "It is my great honor," announced the president, "to introduce this year's valedictorian, who has achieved the highest academic record in Harrington's history for the School of Business, graduating with a perfect grade point average and already secured a position at Blackwell Financial. Please welcome Grace Elizabeth Harrison." The audience applauded as I rose and walked to the podium. I could see my parents' faces had gone completely pale. My mother's hand was pressed against her mouth. My father sat rigid, as if turned to stone. "Thank you, President Caldwell." I began, my voice steady and clear through the microphone. "Distinguished guests, faculty, fellow graduates, and family members. Today marks not just the culmination of our academic journey, but the beginning of lives built on the foundation of knowledge, perseverance, and truth." I paused, looking directly at my parents. My journey to this podium was not traditional. It began with a promise made by my grandparents, who believed education was the greatest gift they could provide. That belief was tested many times along the way. I learned that sometimes the people who should support you the most will be the ones who place the greatest obstacles in your path. That resources intended for your future can be redirected to purposes never intended. My mother shifted uncomfortably. My father stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. I learned that we must sometimes be our own advocates, our own support systems, and our own champions. That the greatest education comes not just from lectures and textbooks, but from discovering who truly believes in your potential and who does not. I continued my speech, weaving in themes of resilience, integrity, and justice, without ever directly exposing my parents to the assembled crowd. When I concluded, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Everyone except my family, who remained seated, stunned and motionless. After the ceremony, as graduates and families mingled on the lawn, Sandra led my parents and brother to a private room I had arranged. They entered cautiously, as if walking into a trap. "What is this?" my father demanded. "Some kind of joke." I stood calmly still, in my valedictorian regalia. "No joke, Dad. I'm graduating with highest honors from Harrington University with a degree in business finance. I've accepted a position at Blackwell Financial with a starting salary of $170,000. But how my mother whispered, "We never paid for this." "No, you didn't," I agreed. "You spent my education fund on Tyler's wedding and house, the fund my grandparents established legally for my education and my education only." I opened a folder on the table displaying the documents I had gathered. This is the original trust documentation specifying the $51,000 was exclusively for my post-secondary education. And these are the bank records showing the transfer to your personal account, followed by payments to Tyler's wedding vendors and the down payment on his house. My father's face flushed red. You had no right to access those records. Actually, as the beneficiary named in the trust, I had every right. What you didn't have was the right to spend that money on anything other than my education. That's called misappropriation of funds, Dad. Some might call it fraud. Are you threatening us? My mother hissed. I'm offering you a choice, I replied evenly. Option 1, I pursue legal action for the misappropriation of my trust fund. Given the documentation I have, my lawyers assure me I would win, plus damages and legal fees. Tyler stood abruptly. You'd sue your own family over ancient history. I worked 3 jobs and lived in a studio apartment the size of your walk-in closet to put myself through school, while you lived in a house bought partly with money that was legally mine, I replied. That doesn't feel like ancient history to me. What's option 2? My father asked quietly. You establish college funds for Tyler's baby and any future grandchildren you may have. The funds will be legally protected with me as trustee to ensure they're used only for their intended purpose. Additionally, you will acknowledge in writing what you did with my college fund. The room fell silent. My mother was the first to speak. Why aren't you asking us to pay you back? Because this was never about the money, I said. It was about the belief that I didn't deserve the same opportunities as Tyler. I've proven that belief wrong on my own terms. Now I want to ensure no other child in this family experiences what I did. My parents exchanged glances. They knew they had no real choice. Fine, my father said tersely. We'll do the college funds. And the acknowledgement, I added firmly. He nodded reluctantly. Tyler looked between us, confusion evident on his face. I don't understand. If you knew about this all along, why didn't you say something sooner? Would you have given back the money? I asked him. Would you have postponed your wedding or bought a smaller house? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I chose to find my own way instead, I continued, and it worked out better than I could have imagined. Now I want to make sure your children have the same opportunities I fought for. As they left, my father turned back. You could have just told us you were attending Harrington. You could have just supported my education in the first place, I replied. We all make choices, Dad. I'm just making sure we all live with the consequences of yours. 3 years later, I was an executive at Blackwell with my own office overlooking the city. I had established a scholarship fund at Harrington for students whose families wouldn't or couldn't support their education. It wasn't a huge endowment, but it covered books and supplies for 5 students each year, enough to make a difference for those who, like me, were determined to succeed despite obstacles. My relationship with my parents remained strained but civil. They had complied with my requirements, setting up properly protected college funds for Tyler's daughter Emma, and the son Megan had given birth to the following year. I reviewed the accounts quarterly, ensuring the funds remained untouched until the children were ready for college. Tyler and I had cautiously rebuilt our relationship. He had matured since becoming a father, working harder than I'd ever seen him to provide for his family. The entitlement that had once characterized him had been tempered by responsibility. Emma's already talking about wanting to be a doctor, he told me during a visit. I want her to have that chance if that's what she still wants when she grows up. She will, I assured him. That's why I'm making sure her college fund is protected. My mother came to see me one spring afternoon, sitting awkwardly on the edge of the chair across from my desk. Your office is impressive, she said, looking around. Thank you. She fidgeted with her purse strap. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. With your grandparents' money, I mean. I waited silently. I was wrong, she finally said, her voice barely audible. We were wrong. You deserved better from us. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was more acknowledgement than I had ever expected. Yes, I said simply. I did. After she left, I stood by the window looking out at the city below. I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the betrayal, the struggle, and ultimately the triumph. I thought about my grandparents and how proud they would be not just of my achievements, but of how I had fought for what was right. Sometimes the greatest education comes from learning who truly supports your dreams, and from finding the strength to build those dreams anyway, even when the people who should believe in you the most do not. Have you ever had someone underestimate your potential, or try to hold you back from your dreams? What did you do to overcome it? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about triumph over adversity. And if you know someone who needs encouragement to pursue their dreams despite obstacles, share this with them. Thank you for listening, and remember, your potential is defined by you, not by others' limited vision of what you can achieve.